So, my name's Katia, as you know. I'm a co-founder of All Means All, the Australian Alliance for Inclusive Education, also a founder of Starting with Julius, and I sit on the board of Down Syndrome Australia and the Attitude Foundation. Now, just about All Means All, I don't know, I know some of the people here are familiar with All Means All and what we do, but we've sort of been around properly sort of incorporated for about a year or so, and our focus is really to bring together to help create a national movement for inclusive education, particularly around the recent clarification from the UN about what is inclusive education, which was general comment number 4. In the past, people have been arguing about what it is and what it isn't. We have a document now, and so that's what frames the work that we do. A lot of it, some of the things we do is we have networks, peer networks like the SIP and the School Inclusion Parent Network, which is basically operating on the basis of a closed Facebook group where parents who are seeking inclusive education for their children, are sort of sharing experiences, tips, interests, resources, etc. We have a parallel group which is SIGN, the School Inclusion Network for Educators, and Lauren Swancart, who spoke today, is the national convener of that group, and that's a group just for teachers and education assistants, etc., who share good practice, and Lauren oversees that and is able to make sure that that we're all on the same page about what inclusive education actually is, and similarly to provide peer support resources, etc. So that these are national groups. We also have an academics group and an academic panel that provides support to the work of All Means All, and who are also in some of these groups, and sort of step in and step up with, well, actually this is what the evidence says, etc., etc. So that's some of the work that we do. We're completely voluntary, unfunded. We only just opened a bank account about a week ago for the first time. So it really does rely on people supporting each other and supporting us to do what we're trying to do. So if you are on Facebook, go and check out the groups.
So I'm from Queensland, along with a number of other ladies who are on the table over there. So first and foremost, I am a parent of 2 children who could not be more different to each other. One is 8, one is 6, and they both go to our local school. And probably the most challenging child that we have in our house at the moment is not the child with the physical and intellectual disabilities, it's the other child at the moment. So I am part of the Queensland Collective for Inclusive Education. So we are a group that has been born out of the work that CREW, or Community Resource Unit, do in Queensland around leadership development. So we've been together for over a year. I think the most simplest way to explain our approach and our focus for the next 12 months is around the 3 Ps. We are focused on people, professionals and politicians, and in that order. So it is our desire to look at our relationships that we have already with our schools, with our other families, and with the system itself, and to work on respectful and progressive engagement around getting people to look at the activities that happen in the education system in Queensland, because I'm sorry to say that not all schools in Queensland are like Thuringowa and or my school where the kids go, Yeronga State School. We're also looking at making sure that we as a group are sustainable and resilient. So we are all family members in the most part doing the work that we're doing. We are unfunded, unincorporated, and hopefully never get a bank account. And we have recently resolved that that's quite a comfortable situation for us. So what we see as our real opportunity is to build a grassroots movement around making sure that people understand what inclusive education is, that they feel supported to advocate for their child or for their family member. And we do that really by sharing what we've learnt from our experiences, the good, the bad and the ugly, sharing the resources that we've found useful. That could be as simple as how to write your vision for your child. We are drawing on a lot of stuff that's been done by other people. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel, but we're trying to be very clear about what our message is. And we have spent a bit of time over the last 12 months working out what that is. And that's been about building our confidence, our own personal confidence in delivering that message and having those conversations, whether it be on behalf of our child, with our local MP, in providing feedback to the Queensland Department of Education around their diversity and inclusion statement that they wrote recently. We've got a new minister, etc., etc. So building our confidence by knowing what our message really is. Also, very simple approach to a grassroots movement using the two things that sustain all of us, coffee and wine. So we are having coffee meetings around the state, and we're trying to push our message out. So geographically, obviously, Queensland is quite a big state. So a lot of us are from Metro Brisbane, where services and schools are, high in numbers, but still big in challenges. But we need to make sure that we are about all of Queensland, and that is a challenge. And we do have regional members of the collective, and we need to make sure that we don't burn them out and that we draw upon their experience and make sure that that is actually part of our message as well. Because I would hate to end up with a message that is just about Metro Brisbane and essentially excludes the rest of the state as well, because we are quite different. The other thing that we've also learnt in the last 12 months is about targeting and finding out what is truly valuable to us as a group. So we've done a lot of talking and a lot of meeting, and some of that's been great learning experiences, but we've also worked out that we need to think about where we spend our time, because we are all family members. A lot of us have lots of different roles in our lives as well, and that this is part of it, but we don't always have everything to give. So at the moment, I suppose the main numbers there's a lot of smoke and mirrors in our group. So there's probably about 20 people in our core group. We've got about just over 200 in what we're calling our peer support group, which is really a digital, so Facebook group. And then we have over 600 people who've liked our page.
So I'm Kim from Family Advocacy, and we're based in New South Wales and work right around New South Wales. Family Advocacy is a family-started organisation over 25 years ago, and it is run by our board of family members and the rest of us who work for Family Advocacy. We do advocacy work at grassroots with helping families with advice and support in inclusive education, inclusive employment, independent housing, NDIS, and other issues and concerns that affect the family members that we work with. But the big, and we also do systemic advocacy, and that's what I was asked to speak about today, because we have a little bit of time, but that was our big message and our exciting news at the moment. So Family Advocacy is now in the process of planning a campaign with the aim of us having a fully inclusive education system by 2030. It's in line with the UN Convention under Sustainable Development Goals to transform the world for people with disability by 2030. And they set out 17 goals in those Sustainable Development Goals. And goal number 4 was talking about inclusive and equitable education and promotion of lifelong learning opportunities for all. That is, all countries to have fully inclusive education by 2030. So we've got a global commitment and a target, and it's big. The world is now seeing and supporting inclusive education. So locally, we are systemically working with the government, state and federal level and the education sector decision makers. And they are listening. Next week, we are going to a meeting with the Department of Ed to be part of their planning process in the strategic planning projects for the whole of system decisions. We're hoping and thinking that they've asked us because to put inclusion on their agenda in a larger way. They know that we work with families who are wanting their children to have inclusive education, and that those families are working with schools who are trying to make it happen. So while for us here, life every day is about our child and our family and our schools and our classrooms, this campaign makes it bigger, this campaign is about making it happen for every child and every person. So that's what it's about. And I think that Jan hit it on the nail earlier when she said, it's just so hit and miss. If you're lucky, you get this help. If you're lucky, you get that principal or this helper. And we've got people here who are trying, but it's just a trickle. So it's very frustrating. We need to make it happen, set a date and get going. So how are we going to do this? Well, we know that through our recent Stand By Me, Don't Ditch Disability Advocacy Funding campaign recently, that people power can force the government to make change, and that did make them make their change about their advocacy funding. That was a previous decision, it was reversed. Inclusive Education 2030, Together We Can Do It, is focusing on uniting and raising our voices with our MPs and education policymakers. It's about working with family members and supporters on how to approach and speak to our MPs about communication and what we're going to talk about and how we're going to talk about it with them in that short period of time that we get, how to make our meetings, how to start and continue and follow up with relationships with our MPs. And it's about getting our message, getting them on board with our message and getting that message on their agenda, and then getting them to have those conversations in government and in policy and in funding decision making. So we urge you all to start now thinking about doing this and about keeping an eye out about the launch of the campaign that will happen at the end of June. If you want to be part of the campaign, or if you want any information earlier about it, please come and see me or call us at Family Advocacy. And if you're not in New South Wales, still do that, and we can, if you don't know about your advocacy, our Alliance members, we can put you in touch with them. But basically we know that we need to work together to make this happen, and that we can work together. We have just worked together, and it works. So people create change together. Let's do it.
Nice to follow on from you. Thank you. My name is Christine Lay, and I'm part of the ACT Inclusive Education Group. We actually don't have an official name yet. We are a new group of parents that have come together, like-minded parents that believe in inclusive education, and all walked the path of inclusive education and ride the waves, as Jodie so aptly put. We've been fortunate enough to have Imagine More here in Canberra to facilitate workshops and seminars that a lot of parents have been able to attend and network. So people on this panel are not brand new to me. I have actually seen them before in different states and in Canberra. So I guess what I'm saying here is that we're also a new group starting out to just be part of the movement, put our voices as parents saying inclusive education is what we want for our children, and we have walked that path and seen the benefits of inclusive education for our children. As a group, our vision that we're still grappling with is that all children participate and learn together alongside same age peers in ACT schools, same class, same period of time, same space, same curriculum, basically the same as another typically developing child. We also are consulting with relevant organisations in the ACT, the Education Department. Sorry, I'll just check. Yes, so we are working on a definition for inclusive education in the ACT Government Adopt the Future of Education document. The document was not clear on what inclusive education actually is, whereas we are very clear on what inclusive education is, so we want to make our mark on that document. So I guess our intent as a group is to be involved in systemic advocacy rather than individual advocacy, which is why we're here as a panel, which is really nice. And we're also on our, evaluation form, if we could also, if you want to be in touch with our group, please give the contact details. We don't have a facility to be contacted, but we're more than happy to get in touch with people, and that includes teachers, not just parents. We'd like inclusion to include everybody that sees inclusion for what it is. And I think that's all I've got to say.
My page dropped, but I wanted to just let you know that I have visited a few MPs over the last few months as a family member, as a teacher. So teachers, you too can visit your MPs, and also as a support person. And, you know, while generally the MPs, I guess, don't know much when you start to go into detail about inclusive education, they do know that I'm a constituent in their electorate, and they do know that I have a serious issue and a concern that I know about and that I want to give them information about, and they do listen. And so, you know, hopefully with our work in the campaign, we're going to help us be able to get our message forward to them that, you know, they are there to serve us and that we really need them and want them to go forward and do what we need them to do. They're a person foremost, but they are our elected delegate. And so, you know, they want you to have that meeting, go and talk to them, because a lot of them say to me, oh, we didn't hear anyone. No one's ever come to us and spoken about this. Or, you know, we need to go and raise our voices up as well.
Well, thank you. That's a really lovely introduction. And I didn't really introduce Cardia in the respect of All Means All, which I'm actually a board member, as is Gina Wilson-Burns, who spoke today. And as Gina, you're the chairperson, I don't know whether you wanted to elaborate on anything that Cardia has said. Just, yeah, I thought so, yeah. I know, right. But we would open up the floor if there's any questions from the floor as to how you might get involved, or any questions around maybe a key message, what's a good pitch, you know, how do you get in contact? Okay, I don't need to probe for that. So.
Hi, thank you for your offers to put ideas out there. And I suppose one of my questions that I've got for the panel is around, as you mentioned about not a definition of inclusion education, also I find there's a huge variability around the actual definition of disability at a Commonwealth, state, territory level, and even at a school level. So when you get down to it, it's, oh, well, that doesn't fit into our definition of what a child is with disability. Or you get into a situation where you have to prove in order to have integration of a student into a mainstream classroom, but they need resources perhaps to help facilitate that process. That in order to get access to those resources, you have to then prove the child has a disability, and then all they have a level that's defined under the disability, the DSM, in order to access funding. And in some cases, children have to prove every year that they have Down syndrome. Now, why you'd need to do that, I'm not sure. Or they have cerebral palsy, that, you know, somehow the condition changes from year to year. Don't know how that happens. So the question to the panel is around how can we get a more transparent definition that is, we're speaking the same language across Commonwealth, state and territory, and that there is a common, clear definition so that we don't get this shifting sand or this sea of, oh, sorry, that your child doesn't fit into the criteria.
That's an excellent question, and at the core of, you know, a lot of the stuff that we're trying to do. Unfortunately, I think someone mentioned a state policy on inclusive education that doesn't really define it. This is really common, by the way. I think I've read quite a few lately, and they really try to avoid actually saying what it is. Just that they like it, but we're not actually going to, you know, talk about it. That was actually what drove, and this is not just in Australia, but that issue. So the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was, you know, ratified or enacted about 10 years ago. And at the 10-year mark, the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has been reviewing reports from countries, you know, and it's all coming in basically saying implementation not going well. And a lot of it's because the word's used to rebrand segregation, because it's very ad hoc, because we've got good examples alongside bad examples, you know, the usual bingo. So getting everyone on the same page in that consistency is really important. Now, for Australia, it would have to be something that's determined at COAG. And I know some of the advocacy groups like People with Disability Australia have pushed for that, for co-ag ministers to agree a definition of inclusive education.
I suppose the question is, I wonder whether if we keep going down this path of trying to get clarity and definition, yet everyone keeps shifting the goalposts, which is historically, or they don't talk about it, wouldn't it be better to just take an approach of, look, this child has certain needs, irrespective of disability, rather than having to prove that you've got a disability, that you need support or integration, to actually base it on where the child's actually at. And if you have an assessment to go with it, fine, but why should you always have to prove that a child has needs when it's clear in a classroom that they have needs?
Look, I think that's at the core of the issue, that inclusive education is actually for everybody. And so, you know, we talk about it in the context of disability because students with disability are the most excluded from the general system. I mean, it's still happening. But the goals of inclusive education are about building a system that meets everyone's needs. So in that sort of, future, we really do need to reform the system, but it is about having a system that responds to a child's need, whatever the cause, whether it's English as a second language, whether it's the family background, whether it's a socio-economic issue, whether it's an emotional issue, etc. Children should have their rights met, as a basic principle. So I agree with what you're saying, and I think those definitions and having to prove disability are, unnecessary and distracting. I think, an interesting discussion that's been had in the last sort of few days is the Gonski report. And there are interesting potential alignments with inclusive principles, so that'll be interesting to see, but that is about responding to the child's individual learning needs. So I guess, as this reform is sort of perhaps being rolled out, we have to be really vocal systemically as advocates to make sure that any changes that are made are consistent with actually creating this fully inclusive, accessible, quality education system for everybody. So all means all, not just kids with disabilities.
Hi, everybody. My question is, why are so many of our educators totally clueless when it comes to inclusive education or good inclusion? And does the government position of providing multiple educational options to parents in fact provide educators with an out from fully embracing inclusion in their classrooms? What can we do to stem this problem at the university level when teachers are actually being trained?
Who wants that one?
Too big?
I have a teacher background,
Okay.
disclose as well. So been teaching for 20 years on and off, and still just do a bit of casual work just to keep in the system. And speaking from my personal experience and experience with my other colleagues, is that we're not trained. You're not trained. You're in a classroom, and the old word is the word that's used is special needs training, and for a long time it's starting to change, and we're working with universities and researchers now. That's some work that Family Advocacy is also doing. I'm sure others is working with universities to get the inclusive lens and understanding of true, authentic, quality, inclusive education, and how you get that for all children, and using that lens when you go through all your teacher training is the ultimate goal. At the moment, in most, it's still just a unit on the side, and we've got many teachers in our system who've been training, working for over 20 years, and you might do an in-service here or there, or you might do a disability focus. That's it. The other thing that is the history, understanding the history of disability education in this country. You can go onto our website, there's a slide and a bit about it, is understanding that it came from a needs base, not from best practice. And most teachers also, probably most teachers here would know, but most teachers don't know that. So we're systemically, just as the early intervention system and the bottom part, the lower path, systemically we're told as teachers, oh, it's better for the children to be in special needs. I'll get 1 on 6. They'll get, they're calmer, but I'd say that's the reason why that we're seeing it now. But that's changing, and we know most teachers want best practice. They want to do better. They're in a classroom and they want to do better. So it's about tooling them up, But I think also changing hearts and minds and getting them on board. All teachers want to help kids, I would say, and teach kids. That's why you become a teacher. But now we need to support that with getting the training and getting the understanding and cloning Lauren and spreading us all around. That's the first answer. The second part was, does anyone else want to answer the second part?
Does the government position of providing multiple educational options to parents in fact provide educators with an out from fully embracing good inclusion in their classrooms? The reason why I ask this is, you know, as parents we are always pushed towards the special ed option, and if we refuse to do that option, we're given varying degrees of intervention all the way up to mainstream. So, and if you do put your child into mainstream, then they're constantly trying to push you back towards special ed. So I was just wondering if, you know, if the government made a decision across the board, just no more special ed units, no more intervention, let's just go wholeheartedly to inclusion and work on training the educators as a whole, right from the university up to the principals, and let's just get this thing done. If we did that, then we would actually achieve our goal long before 2030.
So the short answer is yes, but speaking on behalf of the state that brought you Pauline Hanson, Bob Catter, Peter Dutton, and also the Junior Minister for Disability, Jane Prentice, which I don't know if anyone's had any personal interactions, but we tried recently to speak to her about what we needed from federal politicians. I was part of a group that Family Advocacy supported to be in Canberra to have that conversation. And it is we were talking before about local electorates and MPs wanting to listen to their local constituents. The theme of the conversations that we've had is around what do you want from me, what is in my area of responsibility, because what we're asking for from that point of view is a whole of government solution. And the people that you manage to get some time with are interested in, okay, are you in my electorate? No. Okay, is what you're asking under my area of responsibility? No. Sorry, see ya. So the challenge being to find the way to get in to have that conversation. And so, for example, in Queensland, the Department of Education refuses initially to talk about the idea of closing special schools. So when we went to meet with them to give our feedback on the diversity and inclusion policy statement, which clearly quotes the UN clauses, etc., and talks about the rights of children to education and not parental choice and all that sort of stuff, it's very clear. They still then say in the same conversation, but it is Queensland Department of Education policy to have special schools. Full stop, end of discussion. And that's around what Katia was saying about the illusion of parental choice, and that the constituents come and ask for special settings because there are potentially shortfalls in the mainstream settings, or there are gatekeepers, etc. So while those two conversations are going on, they're hearing the two conversations, and whoever's shouting louder and seeing them most frequently is what is having traction, which is why us being able to collaborate at a national level, and part of the challenge is people don't feel comfortable going to speak to their local MP, and we need to build that capability. Lisa was going to say something.
So really, just to add on to what Sue has done, what I'm just very proud of the Queensland Collective for Inclusive Education, because they have done an amazing job of really balancing the strategy of working bottom up, so working at really engaging with a whole lot of those parents who perhaps sit on the fence, you know, the younger parents who are still making decisions about where to go to school, and the women who are sitting over here have presented at little kind of parent sessions to really influence those parents so that there's not such demand for special schools in the future, as well as kind of influencing politicians. So they did an amazing campaign in the state election with a call to parties, which was kind of Sue's brainchild, but was very successful. And so I think that I was involved with parent advocacy probably for 20 years under Queensland Parents for People with a Disability initially. And I think I have seen enough where unless you pay attention to both those areas equally well, then you're likely to fail. So I think some of us are more likely to be attracted to one or either of those things, and so but trying to keep both of them in tandem seems to me really important. And then I guess also being really strategic. So just trying to work out what are the, which I think Lauren's example at the school level actually did very well, is about how do you get the buy-in for enough people before you then make the next demand. So I think we need to be just very strategic, I guess, in how we move forward. So that's just really, because I'm proud.
I was just going to add something in relation to the question about the two systems and what would happen if. Italy is an interesting proposition, an interesting example to look at. So they closed down special schools in 1978. They pretty much have no special schools, and students with disability are educated in the general system. Now, they haven't reached inclusion sort of utopia, but they're way ahead of most other people. What they've grappled with is really going from segregation to integration and then sort of moving towards inclusion. When they sort of did this, a lot of the practice wasn't there. So they actually had a period, which I remember reading an article about it, they called it the wild years. Because it's basically like we're closing them down and now everyone just has to work it out. But it did, once you close off that option, that sort of leakage, then, the practice just has to lift. And so they have. But, they have moved. They are still in the process of moving from a medical model-based thinking where the way that we help students with disability is to make them less disabled as opposed to creating accommodation. So, if you look at women's education, it took 100 years to kind of get it right. So this is the long road.
And just two things on that. One is, it's complicated, yes. It's really hard, and there's strategy and there's all of that. But it is possible, and it is happening, and it can happen. That's the first thing. There was just I forgot the second thing. Was no? Yeah. I forgot the second one to come to me. Oh, sorry. The second thing is the same with education in Australia and practice. Is that it's a process. Every year we have reflection and how we're doing it better and doing it better and doing it better. So, hopefully the movement is on and it is going, but it is a process. It's going to be a process.
We might just take one more question, sorry. Oh no, I don't know.
Just do two. Yeah. Maybe do two questions. So I live in New South Wales in the northern area of Sydney, and we're in a very unlucky place because it's a beautiful leafy suburb in the area, but we have 4 special needs schools in a radius of 20 kilometres. 2 of those schools are opening high schools in the next 12 months, starting with year 7, 8, 9. There are 3 schools that have support units within that same distance of our house. It was a nightmare to get into a school, but after 3 years we managed to find a school principal that's it, bring him on, even without ever having met my son. So I feel like it's a hit and miss, and I was lucky to find someone and to go in and knock the back door. So, and me as a parent, I feel very vulnerable. I feel very, I'm not very articulate when I'm talking about my son. And I feel I'm very, very interested in the systemic change by 2030. And, but I'm just worried that in our area, at least, we're being mined with new units, new special needs schools. So if we started by focusing on that area, I think we could win the whole world. So that's
Okay. Well, actually, it was interesting when Family Advocacy met with at Parliament House. There was a federal minister there, and he was saying that what you need to do is get a state or a territory that we can uphold as the, best state or territory practicing inclusion, and then we can bring the rest of the states and territories on. So come on, ACT. I'm not looking at anyone, but I just think that that's what we need to do, and make sure that whoever you're talking to, as Sue was saying, know what their parameters are. Have you got the right pitch to them? So if you go to your federal minister and your local minister and say, we want to shut down all the special schools, is that really an ask that's possible? So, you need to maybe think about that and do a bit of research on the people you're meeting and talking to.
Oh,
I'm going for the second.
oh my God.
I know, it's really nice.
I was just going to say, I feel very downhearted because 36 years ago, I was you guys. 36 years ago, I was funded by Centrelink as a supporting parent to do nothing but advocate to the Queensland Education Department about inclusive education. And actually, I don't think that these strategies are the ones that work. I don't think going to your local member does any good at all. I actually think what we have to do is find the way to get the tipping point, like we did, it's a terrible thing to say now, about the NDIS, but we got the NDIS. It didn't happen from the usual kinds of systemic advocacy. It happened from the shutout report, the Human Rights Declaration. You can almost see how that kind of happened. I think there's a little template there that we need to look at, but actually, if I gave you 5 cents for every minister, federal and state, I spoke to over 15 years, I just couldn't tell you how ineffective that was. It just didn't seem to change anything.
And yeah.
Anne and I have had this argument before. And I think, and one of the things I would agree with Anne about is that I think one of the dangers as parent advocates is that we put our energy too much into the advocacy and not enough into the life of our family members. So that would be another thing that I would be. School inclusion is part of a bigger vision, which I think was really clear from yesterday. So I think that's where we would absolutely be on the same page. But I think there's also something that is emboldening about being part of a movement for change that I'd really encourage people to believe in. And then I think it's about our efforts being kind of serious and part of a strong collective effort rather than random. So I think that sometimes we can, our efforts can be a bit random, like we can just feel the need to tell our story to someone without a very serious effort. And I think the campaign for the NDIS was that kind of thing where it was very nationally organised, which made it effective. Whether we'll get what people campaign for, of course, is another thing entirely.
I also think what we've found effective in the last 12 months in increasing our own confidence in those conversations is that we live in a time of storytelling. So a lot of people may frown at social media platforms as, having trolls typing and just slamming other people, but the encouraged parents that we've met who we may have met initially online and then have deeper conversations, and we have the ability to bring people into those conversations. So Lauren often comments on questions and gives the educator's view and gives the Queensland education policy standpoint to help other families to digest those issues. So that option is available for us now that it wasn't available for previously. And I have to be honest that the photo exercise that we did this morning felt very different for us at our table, because that fit in very nicely to our stalker approach to understanding who we need to target and who we need to talk to and what is their take on issues and what does their Twitter profile tell me versus their Facebook profile, and all the stuff that goes with that kind of analysis that we did with the photos. That's how we're approaching our systemic advocacy and finding allies and connecting with them virtually as well as in person where we possibly can as well. So for us it's a long game, and it's also a multi-layered game. And while, obviously we would be encouraged by anything that could happen by 2030, we're in it for the long haul.
just make it. Oh, sorry, I just wanted to add a quick comment to that. My view is actually that, you know, we have to make sure that we're on the same page values-wise. We're asking for the same thing. I think part of the difficulty with advocacy is that we haven't always asked for the same thing. And so there's a lot of confusion out there. But I don't believe there is one way. I think there are multiple ways. There are multiple types of strengths. Some people that are better at telling their own stories, if they do it in a strategic and targeted way, that can be really powerful. Some people are good at commenting on legislation and policy and other stuff. I think this is what building a national movement is about, is pulling all our resources, all our know-how, and just attacking the problem from multiple directions, as long as we are heading in the same direction and we are all clear that we're on the same page. I think that's what general comment number 4 does bring. It's just, that's the definition of inclusion, you know. Let's just get on with it now. Stop arguing about whether special units or whatever, you know. So, yeah.
Shall I go? I promised Jan it was a quick one. I don't know if this is relevant, but my question is around Italy. And in 1978, when they closed the schools, what was driving that?
I've often sort of tried to find out the story behind that. I hear it was a parent. So a really connected, noisy parent, and they did it from an equity position. So they didn't have the practice, there was no CRPD, they just thought it was discriminatory, and so they just thought, we're going to do this. And it was pretty harsh. I mean, if you look at it in a sense, there were, from what I understand, and their legislations had a number of evolutions, including sort of recently, but they actually, I think at one point, had penalties, like as in funding withdrawn for schools that were gatekeeping, all that sort of stuff. So systems not, I mean, I have many Italian friends, and they always say, oh, it's not perfect, it's not perfect. I mean, we all say that. And then a friend of mine actually moved to France, and she's just, her head's spinning at the horror of, you know, sort of going from a system where her child just turned up at school and that was just expected, and people just got on with it, to, oh, your child has to be in some sort of institutionalised type thing, and she can have 1 hour in the mainstream system for Spanish class, that sort of thing. But, you know, it has evolved, but, you know, they did just decide to do it. And whilst, you know, we wouldn't, I think, necessarily advocate for that, because it was difficult, I think, for teachers, for parents, for students to just do it in that way. But, you know, to cutting off that option meant that the practice had to be lifted. So, but I mean, I think development goals and what the UN is asking for is for countries to at least have a plan. We don't have a plan. We have no transition plan that says by this date we do this, and by that date, and, you know, or what we're supposed to be doing. It's just all ad hoc. You know, New South Wales is increasing special classes, that one's doing that, you know, reading all these policies, it's all over the place. So,
Okay, I'm sure we could go on for the rest of the afternoon into the evening with wine, but but I do want to say thank you very much to the panel for sharing that, and we will get organised and have a firm strategy where we're sharing resources. And that's the beauty of you know, having everybody here today and sharing what's going on in different states and territories, so we can have a collective voice, because it is the grassroots that makes a difference, but we need to be a little bit more strategic about it. So thank you for the panel. We've got some gifts for you, and a big round of applause.